Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. Hope everyone can hear me okay and sees my screen. Otherwise, please let us know. I'm Beeke. I'm a vice president at Goldman Sachs and work in the data engineering department. And my current focus is to manage the program to open source Goldman Sachs's data management platform, Legend. So for everyone who hasn't heard of Legend yet, Legend is a data management platform that aims to provide solutions to data challenges across the entire data lifecycle. And the platform has been open sourced in the fall of last year, and the code is available on GitHub for users to install it on their own premises. So for today's Legend 101 session, I'd like to demo you the core functionality of the data modeling tool Legend Studio, for which I will use the shared instance of Legend hosted by FINOS, what you can see here on the screen. So if you're new to data modeling, no problem. The example that I will show you is very simple and should give you a good idea of what data modeling is about. So what we will cover is creating a sample data model that is focused on answering business-related questions. And Studio features such as creating a class, property, constraints, and much more. What we won't cover is actually linking that data model that we're creating to a database and the query features. That's what we will cover in Thursday's session. So let's get started with the demo. And for that, I would like to take you on a little journey. So let's imagine I'm the head of people analytics at a hypothetical firm. And for you to easier follow what I'm talking about, let me open this little thing here. So what I want to do is basically create systematic, high quality reports on top of my raw data, leveraging a data model that I'm creating. So what may be questions that someone working in the people analytics department has in mind that would make sense to have in a report? So I think probably the most straightforward question may be how many employees does the firm have, right? That's always good to know. The second one may be, what is the tenure of the firm's employees, maybe in a specific location. So let's say we are interested in the US office location. So in the US office location. That maybe another thing that may be good to know is how many contractors does the firm have? Oh, I'm sorry. What is the tenure of my firm's employees in months? That's what I want to know. And then I would like to know how many contractors does the firm has in the US office location. Mixing up my own questions here. Okay, so how many contractors does the firm has in the US office location? That may be good to know for budgeting reasons. And then my last question is, what is the percentage of the firm's interns who identify as female and work in the IT department? Probably also always good to know your firm's diversity stats. Great. So now that I know what I would like to be a part of my report, let's actually start creating a data model that would help me with answering these questions. So for that, the first thing I would actually like to do is creating a new package that will house all of the key concepts and attributes and relationships that I will build for my data model. So I will call this the human resource model. And as I would mainly like to drive this demo from our diagram view, let me create a diagram first. I will call this the human resource diagram. Okay, so let's keep in mind again what kind of first question we would like to tackle. How many employees does the firm have? So what may be key concepts that we would need to put in our data model that would help us answering these questions? So probably the first one that comes to mind is a firm concept or a firm class. So as you can see here, I just double click in the diagram and then I can quickly create my first class. The next one may be maybe employee. Okay, let's look at that. So now that I'm thinking about it, probably an employee is rather the relationship a person has to a firm than its own concept. So let me actually change this to be a person class instead. So how I can do this is just hovering over the name here, and then you can see that the icon changes. So let me double click in here, and I will create a person class. Awesome. So as I said, a person and a firm are probably like linked together by defining the employment type the person has to the firm. I think it's probably good to create another class, which is called contract, which defines exactly that relationship. So there's another way how I can add classes to my diagram view. I can click on this plus sign and then just click on my diagram and do the same thing. So now I think I have all my key concepts that I need, but let's add a little bit more details to my classes that I just created. How I can do this is I can select the firm, hit Alt and the arrow down button, and I can actually start creating properties in my class. So a firm probably has a name. Let's keep it fairly simple. And a person, what I can also do to add properties, I can select it, hit E, and it pops up this menu here where I can hit the plus sign and start typing properties. So again, let's keep it fairly simple here. And let's say my person has a first name, which is of data type string and has the cardinality of 1, and also a last name. Oops. With the same data type and multiplicity. Awesome. And then let me close this again. Now I said a contract defines the relationship a person has to the firm, probably by defining the employment type. So let me add this to be employment type. So as I know in my hypothetical firm, there are only 3 types of employments. So I would actually like to restrict the allowed values that could be associated with this employment type property. So how I can do this is actually by creating an enumeration. So let's make sure we have selected the correct model here. Type an enumeration, and I would like to have an employment type enumeration with the values. In my firm, there are employees, contractors, and also interns. So let's navigate back into our diagram. And now for you to be a little bit, or is it a little bit more easier for you to follow, let me actually zoom in. So you can either select different zoom values here, or you can auto size the diagram view. So now I would like to link my employment type enum that I just created to my employment type attribute. So let me select this. Great. Let me also resize the boxes a little bit so that everything looks neat. So now that we have the key concepts created, the last thing that is missing is actually defining the relationships between these classes. And this is fairly easy to do directly from the diagram. So you can just select this property tool here. And then I can define that a firm has probably many zero or many contracts. And I can also define that the contract should probably just list this one firm, right? Now, let me do the same between the person class and the contract class. So a person, again, can have zero to many contracts. But the contract should specify the firm and the person. So it's just one. Great. So I think now we have all the key concepts defined and the relationships to tackle our first question. Let's look at it again. How many employees does the firm have? So what I could do now is I could actually go to my firm class and I could add an attribute called employee count, which is an integer. But there's like some downsides to this. So when we are thinking of eventually linking this data model to real data, I would need to have a data set available that lists me this employee count, which is probably fairly error prone and needs to be continuously updated. So it may be better if I actually derive that property based on other attributes that I defined in my data model. And with Studio, you can do this via the derived property element. So let me actually cancel this out and go into our derived properties here. And now what is best practice is to think about how you kind of want to chunk down the properties that you're creating here. Because today I may be interested in the number of employees, but tomorrow I may have a different question. So it's probably good to think about how you can best chunk down these derived properties that you're creating here. So as I think it will be very useful for me to just extract first the set of employee contracts that I can then reuse in other properties fairly easily. So let me actually start by creating an employee contracts property. And as I said, this would return me a set of contracts. So, and there can be zero or many. And now what I'm doing is actually using the pure syntax to write a little code snippet that would allow me to get the set of employee contracts back. So let me type something first, and then we can go from there. So what I'm doing now is basically defining what kind of attribute I would like to look up, which is the contracts attribute that's defined in my firm. And I would like to apply a filter on top of this because I'm only interested in the contracts of the employees. So let me actually do this. Okay. Type. Okay, so what I defined here, and you can name this anything, is basically just the pointer to which I'm applying the filter to. So in this case, it's the pointer to the item I'm applying the filter to. So in this case, it's contract. So I just named it C. And I want to look up resource model. I want to look up my employment type employee. So in that I specified, in my employee in my enumeration. Okay. So that worked fine. As you can see here, while I was typing, Studio gave me some indications if my code will compile or not. And when I hit F9, it actually worked and compiled. So now that I'm thinking about it, I think it would probably make most sense if I'm just looking up the active employees. So only the ones that have no end date basically defined and are still active employees in the firm. So I think for that, I would need to add some more attributes to my contract class. So let us go back to the diagram and let me actually define a start date, which is of type date, and an end date. Great. And now I can use this in my derived property. So, and in order to add another filter criteria, I will just do this, and that should be empty, right? Because then they are still active employees. Beautiful. So now that I have my set of contracts, I would like to now tackle my employee count property that was of interest to me at the beginning. So let me add another one, employee count. And then what I do here is I can now refer back to my employee contracts property that I just created. And then define that I'm here interested in a set of persons actually, and I want like to count them. So now as you can see here, Studio actually lets me know that I picked the wrong data type here. So of course, string doesn't make sense when I'm interested in a count. So let me actually change that real quick to be an integer. And it's compiling nicely. So as you can see here, there are some other messages that would help you figure out where your problem in the code that you're writing is. So let's, for example, imagine I would have mistyped the property name here. It would actually let me know that this property doesn't exist. So it's super helpful to figure out if you're on the right track with the code that you're writing. Awesome. So that's the first question that we now tackled. So let's look at what the next one is. So what is the tenure of the firm's employees in months? So for that, let us take a look back at our diagram. And I think we should have all the key concepts defined to tackle the next question. So let us actually go directly into the derived property menu again. And now what I would like to show you is that you can also apply operations on top of your properties that you defined already with the map function. So what I will do here is employee tenure in months. And that will be, again, an integer. And we will return 0 to many values in here. Okay, so again, I'm making use of my employee contracts property. So it was probably a good idea to define it. So, and now I would like to apply the map function to it. And so in order to generate the tenure of only active employees, probably what I need to do is calculate the date difference between today's date and their start date. So that's exactly what I will do here. I'm calculating the date difference. Oops. Start date. And now actually the basically the duration units are defined as an enumeration in the pure language itself. So I would actually need to call this So similarly to how I called my employment type enum, I will do the same for the duration units now. Date and unit. And as I said, I would like to have it in months. Okay, that was it already. So now I would really like to make sure that this value here is returned accurately. So I think what would make sense is to add a quality rule to my data model as well. I would like to make sure that if an end date and a start date is defined in our database or in the data table, I would need to make sure that the start date is always before the end date. Otherwise, I would know that there's something wrong with my data. So I can do that by adding a constraint to my contract class. So I can go in here, and as you can see, I can navigate to different classes from the left-hand side menu, or I can also just use the tabs at the top here to navigate between the different elements. Okay, so now let me create a constraint that the start date is before end date. And we make use of this little code snippet again. And I would like to define that when we have an empty end date, then everything is fine, right? Because then we don't need to apply any rules. But if there is a value, I would like to make sure that this start date is smaller than this end date. Cool. So that's how easily you can add a quality rule to your classes or data model. So now that I'm looking at this again, I think I don't like calling the contract attribute start date. I would rather like to call it a hire date. So I could now go to all the places where I have a start date in my code or in my names or attributes, but there's even an easier way to do it. And I would like to show you a different view in Studio. So you can actually toggle between what we call the form view, which we are currently looking at, and the text view. So you can click this button here, and you can see that everything we've been doing up until now is seamlessly translated into code. So, and this works back and forth. So any change I make here is translated into form view as well. And I will show you exactly that. So let's find all the places where we used start date. And now I would like to replace it with a hire date and in all the places. So you can see how quickly that was. Let me go back to my form view, and you can see in all the places where I use start date, it's changed. Also here in our diagram. Cool. So let's tackle our next question. Quick reminder on what this was. This is how many contractors does the firm have in the US office location? Okay, so looking back to our diagram here, I think we would need to introduce a new class, the office class, which could define the country that the office is in. So let us add a class again. And as I said, in my office class, there should be a country attribute that defines all of the countries I have offices in. So let me do this again and say country. So again, my hypothetical firm only operates in 3 countries. So I would like to restrict the value, the allowed values again. So let me go and create another enumeration country. And I have an office, or my company has an office in the US, in Germany, and in India. Oh, let me go back. Select the country. Now we need to define the relationships again. So probably what we can define is that my firm has many offices, or 0 or the 1 or many offices. And probably the contract also specifies in what office this person is hired in. So it should be 1. So now I feel that this looks a little bit messy with all the lines in here. So what I can do is actually highlight this line, hit delete, and it pulls in the attribute and relationship that I just defined. So I think that looks better. So now I think we have everything again to define our next derived property in the firm class. So, and what I would like to show you now is that you can also, instead of chunking those properties out, you can also just create one that has everything. So what I will do is I will call this contractors in the US count. So here we would need to apply filters and also count the number of contractors. So contractors in the US is of type integer, and it should be exactly 1 count. So first, again, I will look up the contracts attribute, and I will apply a filter to it. Oops, filter. And I would like to have, again, the employment type filtered, but this time by contractors. Resource model, employment type is contractor. So now I also need to say that the contractor is in the US. So let me add another filter criteria. And here you may be wondering why I'm not filtering again by only active contractors. This is a little bit more complex, which I think wouldn't be adding too much value to this demo. So let's just assume I'm interested in the whole population of the contractors. So here's like office, country. We are looking up the country, country, USA. Okay, so and of this, I'm counting the set of persons that would be returned to me, and I'm counting them. Okay, let me make sure I have all the parentheses that are needed. And you can easily expand the code snippet out, especially when it gets a little bit more complicated, so that you can make sure you're looking up everything that you need. Okay, great. And you can see here, Studio helped me again to figure out where I have something wrong in my code. So that's how easily we can now determine the count of contractors in the US. Now we're already at our last question. So what is the percentage of the firm's interns who identify as female and work in the IT department? So looking again at our diagram here, I think we would need definitely a new attribute in the person class that would determine the gender. And then also probably a new class that's called a department. So let me add very quick a gender attribute here. And I would like to restrict the allowed values again. Let me create a gender enum. And for simplification purposes, let's just say that's female, male, and other. And let me link this. And now let me quickly create the department class. And probably the department has names. And again, in my hypothetical firm, I know that there are only 3 departments. So let me create another enumeration here with the department name. And we have an IT department in my hypothetical firm, an HR department, and a sales department. May not be the most efficient company, but that's what we are working with here. Okay, so now that I defined this, let me link it again. And now, as you can imagine, the last step is again to define the relationships here. So I think a department has probably either one or many offices. And the contract should also specify the department the person is working in. It should be exactly one department. And again, let me actually drag this into the contract class so that it looks a little bit neat. And I think also the firm should probably have departments as an attribute, and there can be one or many. And let me also drag this in so that everything looks nice in our diagram. Okay, so I think we can tackle the last question. Navigating back to my firm derived properties. And now that we want to calculate a percentage, I think it makes again sense to chunk down the properties so that we don't have a gigantic statement that may be a little bit harder to write and for you to follow. So let me first actually create a property called IT interns, which would return a set of persons to me. It can be either 0 or many. So in here, like this should all look super familiar to you by now. We are again applying a filter, employment type, human resource model, and then employment type is intern. And then I would also like to filter by the department. So this is what I'm doing now, is department. And then we have that defined in our department name, enum, human resource model, department name, and that is IT. And now, as I said, we want to have a set of persons back. Probably I forgot like a number of indices again. Quickly check. I think this is here. Here. Yep. So now we have our set of IT interns, and now it should be fairly straightforward to calculate the percentage of female interns, IT interns. So IT intern female percentage, which should be returning a float value and exactly 1. So now I'm referring back to my IT interns property, and I will apply another filter on top of this because I'm only interested in this case in the female intern population. So I will do exactly that. Gender, resource model, gender is female. And then I'm interested in the count. Oops. And I'm dividing this by this IT intern. Interns count. Okay, just double checking if I have set all the things correctly. Yep. Yep. Okay. So now we have a nice set of properties that would allow me to, once I connected to my data model to data, to create me all these values that I'm interested in. So, but I actually think maybe there are a couple of more enhancements that I could do to my model, just looking at this. So I think the first thing that I would like to do is make it easier for people that are not me and look at the data model to find the items of relevance to them. So for example, if someone comes in here and would like to look up a firm class, but may not be using firm as a search criteria, but a different name, I would like to make it easier for people to navigate my model. So I would actually like to tag the firm class with an alias value. So, and I can do that fairly simply in Studio. So first, as I probably will have many of those going forward, let me create a profile package that houses all these tag values for me. So as I said, I would like to have an alias tag. And tags actually allow you to then add a free text to this tag with the information you care about. So it adds additional information to your model. Okay, so that's created. And then let me go back to my firm class, navigate to the tag value. Let me pull in this profile here, select alias. And I think maybe company, maybe something that people use to search for my firm class. The other thing I would like to do is I actually know that someone in my hypothetical firm is working on a way better representation of the office class. And I don't want anyone to waste their time uplifting my office class when there's someone already working on it. So I would like to label this class as deprecated. I can do that by adding a stereotype. So I can just go in here again to my profile and also maintain the stereotypes in exactly that profile. So here I said I want to have this listed as deprecated. So I will go to my office class, select stereotype, drag this in, and label it as deprecated. So you can see here this little visual of your class is updated with deprecated, and also our diagram shows this now. Okay, the last thing I would like to add is, because I know probably the data that we would link to the gender attribute is fairly sensitive. So I would like to actually label this gender attribute as sensitive. So I go back to my stereotypes and add another one called sensitive. And then would go into my person class, look up the gender attribute, expand the additional information on it, and then drag this in here and label it as sensitive. Great. So I think I now have all the additional information that I wanted to add to my model also captured. So there are two more things I would like to show you. First is, as you may have noticed, there's another package here in my workspace, which is called a firm model and houses the legal entity class. So that is something that I copied in here before the demo, and I know that this is something that's fairly well maintained in my hypothetical company. And it's actually housing the legal names that are applicable to my firm. So actually, instead of having my firm name attribute, I would rather like to inherit this legal name attribute from the legal entity class. And this you can do by assigning a legal entity as a super type to my firm class. And I can also do this again from our diagram. I can just pull in the legal entity class here and then use this little inheritance tool here, drag this up, and that's already how I defined it. So when you go back to the firm class, you can actually see we are now inheriting the legal name attribute, and legal entity is defined as a super type. So we probably don't need the name attribute here. So, and now the very last thing. Now you may be wondering, looking at this model that we created, what can we do with this, right? So as I already mentioned at the beginning, we can now take this model and link it to a real database. So what we are currently supporting is Snowflake and an H2 test database. And then I could create ad hoc queries, or what we are still working on open sourcing is you can also create a data service for repeated usage of these ad hoc queries that you're creating from Studio. Or what you can also do is actually integrate that model into other systems fairly easily. So let's assume in the hypothetical firm, I have an HR system that's written in JSON schema. And I would like to reuse portions of this model that I just created in that particular system to generate basically the answers to these questions that I just posed. So for that, Studio allows you to do code generations. So I can click on here and then select my JSON schema. And you can see here, it's neatly generated for you. And I can basically just copy paste this into my HR systems code base. So I think that concludes today's demo, where we went through data modeling basics and kind of the core functionality of Studio. So if you've been wondering where I found all of these functions that I've been using, you can go to our website, legend.finos.org, and we have a docs page, and under language, you can find all the release functions and their syntax. So that should be fairly helpful. And otherwise, please also feel free to browse around the website and learn more about Legend. I don't know, probably someone posted it already in the chat, but this is also our GitHub repository where you can find all the information and code about Legend. Okay, awesome. So that concludes my demo, and feel free to raise any questions that you have.